Good morning, you guys. Today is Tuesday, March 24th. This is day 7 of our time at home. And as you may have seen yesterday, the governor gave a new order saying that we are in a shelter in place, meaning we are not supposed to be leaving our houses unless it's for groceries and medicine. So that's something I want you to be mindful of. There's obviously things changing in our state and in our country day by day. So some of the videos that I've had friends record, all of them recorded their videos last week in the states that they're living in. So some of their information might not be totally up to date. For example, I didn't end up posting this video, but my friend Abby, who lives in Haiti, had to fly home last week because the coronavirus was potentially going to hit Haiti. And since she recorded her video, it now has, which means it would be very unlikely that she's going to be able to travel back anytime soon. Something that really impacts Haiti is they already don't have great medical care. So a country like that, to have the coronavirus start to come in, is really dangerous for a lot of people because they won't have the proper medical support to assist people when they do start getting really sick. So there are definitely videos that you'll see in the coming days that maybe have referenced school closures or have referenced maybe even some running out of toilet paper at the stores, but there are definitely new things that have started happening in different states. A lot of states have now gone into a shelter in place similar to like what we have as of yesterday from the governor. So just keep that in mind that some of the videos you're seeing are not totally up to date. So moving on, today we're moving into the southeast region. So the southeast region of the U.S. Is where Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee are. Those are the 3 states that you'll have videos from. Today you'll have a video from Charlotte, North Carolina, and also from Nashville, Tennessee. So make sure you click on those links to learn a little bit about those 2 places in the southeast and start exploring. I think I listed 5 or 6 states from the southeast for you to explore on National Geographic Kids today. So take some time to explore that. As we kind of move through our 5-finger retell, yesterday we did who. So you were supposed to write a sentence saying who was in this section of our story. It would have been Klaus, Sonny, Violet, and Count Olaf, because unfortunately Uncle Monty had already been killed, possibly by the snake. We're not totally sure. All we know now is that Count Olaf is saying they are still going on their trip to Peru, and he yelled at them and threatened them with his knife and said, "Get in the car, get in the Jeep." So it sounds like the 4 of them might still be going to Peru. We'll have to find out a little bit more today. But what I want you to be paying attention to as I read is this next finger. So we did who yesterday. Today I want you to focus on when and where this part of the story is taking place. You could do this in 1 sentence. It might end up having to be 2. So you might say something like, this part of the story took place at Uncle Monty's house, or it might end up being on the boat on the way to Peru. And when it was taking place, you could say it was early in the morning. Pay attention to whatever details. We know so far it's morning time. That's when they found him. They had just been woken up. So pay attention to when and where. That's our 2nd finger that we're going over today. And post at least 1 or 2 sentences in the comment section telling me when and where this part of the story was. So we will do a few pages of reading now, and then you can get going with your comment. So it is, as you know, very, very rude and usually unnecessary to use profanity, but the Baudelaire orphans were too terrified to point this out to Stefano, so Stefano must have used some profanity. I probably skipped that part. Taking a last look at their poor Uncle Monty, the 3 children followed Stefano to the door of the reptile room to get in the Jeep. To add insult to injury, a phrase which here means forcing somebody to do an unpleasant task when they're already very upset. Stefano forced Violet to carry his suitcase out of the house, but she was too lost in her thoughts to care. She was remembering the last conversation she and her siblings had had with Uncle Monty, and thinking with a cold rush of shame that it hadn't really been a conversation at all. You will recall, of course, that on the ride home from seeing zombies in the snow, The children had been so worried about Stefano that they hadn't said a word to Uncle Monty, and when the Jeep had arrived at the house, the Baudelaire orphans had dashed upstairs to hash out the situation without even saying good night to the man who now lay dead under a sheet in the reptile room. As the youngsters reached the Jeep, Violet tried to remember if they had even thanked him for taking them to the movies, but the night was all a blur. She thought that she, Klaus, and Sonny had probably said, "Thank you, Uncle Monty," when they were standing together at the ticket booth, but she couldn't be sure. Stefano opened the door of the Jeep and gestured with the knife, ushering Klaus and Sonny into the tiny back seat, and Violet, the black suitcase heavy on her lap, into the front seat beside him. The orphans had a brief hope that the engine would not start when Stefano turned the key in the ignition, but this was a futile hope. Uncle Monty took good care of his Jeep, and it started right up. Violet, Klaus, and Sonny looked behind them as Stefano began to drive alongside the snake-shaped hedges. At the sight of the reptile room, which Uncle Monty had filled so carefully with his specimens, and in which he was now a sort of specimen himself, the weight of the Baudelaire's despair was too much for them, and they quietly began to cry. It is a curious thing, the death of a loved one. We all know that our time in this world is limited, and that eventually all of us will end up underneath some sheet, never to wake up. And yet it is always a surprise when it happens to be someone we know. When it happens to someone we know. It is like walking up the stairs to your bedroom in the dark, and thinking there is one more stair than there is. Your foot falls down through the air, and there is a sickly moment of dark surprise as you try and readjust the way you thought of things. The Baudelaire orphans were crying not only for their Uncle Monty, but for their own parents, and this dark and curious feeling of falling that accompanies any great loss. What was to happen to them? Stefano had heartlessly slaughtered the man who was supposed to be watching over the Baudelaires, and now they were all alone. What would Stefano do to them? He was supposed to be left behind when they went to Peru, and now he would be leaving with them on the Prospero. And what terrible things would happen in Peru? Would anybody rescue them there? Would Stefano get his hands on the fortune? And what would happen to the 3 children afterward? These are frightening questions, and if you are thinking about such matters, they require your full attention. And the orphans were so immersed in thinking about them that they didn't realize that Stefano was about to collide with another automobile until the moment of impact. There was a horrible tearing sound of metal and glass as a black car crashed into Uncle Monty's Jeep, throwing the children to the floor with a jarring thump that felt as though it left the Baudelaire stomachs up on the seat. The black suitcase lurched into Violet's shoulder and then forward into the window shield, which immediately cracked in a dozen places so it looked like a spider web. Stefano gave a cry of surprise and turned the steering wheel this way and that, but the 2 vehicles were locked together, and with another thump veered off the road into a small pile of mud. It is a rare occurrence when a car accident can be called a stroke of good fortune, but that was most certainly the case here. With the snake-shaped hedges still clearly visible behind them, the Baudelaire's journey toward Hazy Harbor had stopped. Stefano gave another sharp cry, this one of rage. "Blasted!" he shouted as Violet rubbed her shoulder to make sure she wasn't seriously hurt. Klaus and Sonny got up cautiously from the Jeep floor and looked out the cracked window shield. There appeared to be only one person in the other car, but it was hard to tell, as that vehicle had clearly suffered much more damage than Uncle Monty's Jeep. Its entire front had pleated itself together like an accordion, and one hubcap was spinning noisily on the pavement of Lousy Lane, making blurry circles as if it were a giant coin somebody had dropped. The driver was dressed in gray, and making a rough hacking sound as he opened the crumpled door of the car and struggled his way out. He made a hacking sound. Pay attention to that. I wonder if you're already making a prediction of who that might be. He made the hacking sound again, and then reached into a pocket of his suit and pulled out a white handkerchief. "It's Mr. Poe!" Klaus cried. It was Mr. Poe, coughing away as usual, and the children were so delighted to see him that they found themselves smiling despite their horrible circumstances. "Mr. Poe, Mr. Poe!" Violet cried, reaching around Stefano's suitcase to open the passenger door. Stefano reached out an arm and grabbed her sore shoulder, turning his head slowly so that each child saw his shiny eyes. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "This is a bit of luck for you, but it is your last. The three of you will be back in this car with me and heading toward Hazy Harbor in time to catch the Prospero. I promise you." "We'll see about that," Violet replied, opening the door and sliding out from beneath the suitcase. Klaus opened his door and followed her, carrying Sunny. "Mr. Poe, Mr. Poe!" "Violet?" Mr. Poe asked. "Violet?" Or no, he asked. He's confused. "Violet?" Mr. Poe asked. "Violet Baudelaire, is that you?" "Yes, Mr. Poe," Violet said. "It's all of us, and we're so grateful you ran into us like this." "Well, I wouldn't say that," Mr. Poe said. "This was clearly the other driver's fault. You ran into me." "How dare you!" Stefano shouted, and got out of the car himself, wrinkling his nose at the smell of horseradish that filled the air. He stomped over to where Mr. Poe was standing, but halfway there the children saw his face change from one of pure rage to one of brummagem, confusion, and sadness. "I'm sorry," he said, in a high, fluttery voice. "This whole thing is my fault. I'm so distressed by what has happened that I wasn't paying any attention to the rules of the road. I hope you're not hurt, Mr. Poe." "It's Poe," Mr. Poe said. "My name is Poe. I'm not hurt. Luckily, it looks like nobody was hurt. I wish the same could be said for my car. But who are you, and what are you doing with the Baudelaire children?" "I'll tell you who he is," Klaus said. "Please, Klaus," Mr. Poe admonished, a word which here means reprimanded Klaus, even though he was interrupting for a very good reason. "It is not polite to interrupt. My name is Stefano," Stefano said, shaking Mr. Poe's hand. I was Dr. Montgomery's assistant." Here is the next picture. We're in the middle of a chapter, so we'll keep going with it tomorrow. But there's a picture that comes up on the next page. So, they have run into Mr. Poe. Stefano is still claiming to be Stefano. Will the children be able to explain to Mr. Poe who he really is? We'll have to see tomorrow. So remember, your job today is giving me 1 or 2 sentences telling me where and when this part of the story took place. Pay attention to what time of day it is, where they are. You could probably either say at the house or you could say wherever the accident happened. Up to you, but give me a sentence. We're on to that second finger of the 5-finger retell method. I hope you have a great day. Make sure you're still staying healthy, washing your hands, and being kind to your families. You are so loved and you are so missed. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.